All men can talk, and more often than not, alas, talk to no purpose. But only a handful can talk to the point and intelligently. Among these again, only a few can converse and hold their audience. Thus, brilliant conversationalists are indeed almost as rare as comets, and paradoxical though it may sound, they are rarer among good writers than among those who know no penmanship. The reason is not far to seek. Good writers find it easier to voice their thoughts when alone than when they are in others' company. Besides, once a man has got used to expressing himself through written words, he does feel somewhat shy about expressing his thoughts extempore through verbal words, for these he finds not nearly as convincing as the mots justes, the inevitable words that come to him when he reflects in tranquillity, pen in hand. Tagore happily did not belong to this category, or else we would have missed all the beauty and wisdom that he has bequeathed to us through his numerous recorded talks. He has indeed told us time and time again about his green youth, diffident and tongue-tied. But long before I had my first conversation with him 45 years ago, he had risen to fame as a conversationalist who could, with a torrent of golden words pouring from his lips, cast a spell on his audience. His forte, of course, was his resplendent genius, about which one might well say he touched nothing that he did not adorn. But he was not merely a great decorator and beautifier of life. He was also suggestive and original to a degree, and did at every turn open new vistas before us whenever he came to hold forth on no matter what theme. A writer can, and indeed often does, influence people in a way the conversationalist cannot. At the same time, a brilliant conversationalist can score over a writer because of the immediacy of his appeal, which may be summed up as the appeal of life in action, whereas the writer's is essentially the appeal of life in repose. To put it trenchantly, if the pen is mightier than the sword, verbal eloquence is mightier than the avalanche. When one reads Plato's dialogues or Plutarch's lives today, one cannot help but marvel at the tremendous power the spoken word used to wield in those days. How the incomparable Socrates used to sway the intelligentsia, and how great orators like Cicero or Demosthenes fired the multitudes, changing overnight the destinies of empires with the impact of their breathtaking words. When one ponders such facts, one may conclude somewhat hastily that a conversationalist today cannot possibly rival the achievements of the great orators of yore. I wonder, what about Dr. Johnson's scintillating talks as reported by the unforgettable Boswell who made history? What about Goethe's conversation as recorded by Eckermann, which have moved innumerable hearts? What about the revealing conversations of Einstein, Shaw, Russell, Whitehead, Roland and others? And last though not least, what about Sri Ramakrishna's talks, which have, as recorded in the Gospel, revolutionized the lives of millions the world over? No, conversations can still sway people and leave a lasting impression upon our minds, provided the conversationalist is worth his salt, as Tagore was. To give an instance or two of how he used to grip us, in 1927 I had the privilege of listening to his discourse on the theme of man and woman, a discourse which I was at pains to record, and a copy of which later, while touring Europe, I sent to the famous Havelock Ellis. He wrote back, "It gives me joy to find that Tagore says clearly at almost every point what I have said myself or tried to say clearly in my book, Man and Woman. On the whole, I could hardly desire to see a more beautiful presentation in a short space of a conception which corresponds to my own than the one Tagore has put into this conversation with a skill in speech beyond me. For exigencies of space, I'll have to be content with giving here but two excerpts from this report to illustrate the deep suggestiveness and impressive originality of his outlook, borne home to his audience through the exquisite spontaneity of his utterance and the appositeness of his similes, always hitting the nail on the head. Those who are interested must read the entire interview in my book, Among the Great. It was on the morning of the New Year's Day that he talked of his adolescence at some length. He then stressed the value of chastity and purity in all romance, and lastly said that he had always looked upon woman's love as a grace, a favor. For, he went on to add, I have experienced again and again that woman's love always leaves behind it a legacy of flowers in our souls, a harvest of dreams that would never have borne but for her showers of tenderness. Her gift of blooms may fade with time, yes, but the memory of their fragrance never. I was deeply moved as I reflected on the implications of his tribute. It is not often that the babble of conversation betrays the deep of the soul. I was titillated and longed to imbibe more, so I visited him again in his beautiful garden in the evening. Fortune favored me. I found him alone. He smiled at me and said, Aim your shafts. The target is ready. I hesitated for a split second and then asked, What do you think of the modern woman's clamor for equality of status? I mean, in the sphere of social rights and responsibilities. Tagore said, You will have to be content with a platitude for an answer. For I have always held that essentially woman is not man's competitor, but complement. This may sound somewhat old-fashioned, but an authentic experience indeed becomes richer with the stamp and seal of time on its brow. So I will repeat that I do not think that woman stands to gain in the long run by rushing out into the open for the same laurels as a fellow scrambler of her mate. For her soul cannot find any real satisfaction if she goes out of her way to grab things that do not tend to beautify life. She must preside first and last over her own world, which is beauty. It is up to her to cherish her native loyalties, the more so because her partner is liable to forget that our masculine civilization harbors far too many disruptive forces and vociferous tendencies. Woman should not accentuate this instability. It is for her to restore the lost equilibrium through the radiant touch of her more harmonious personality, to act as ballast to the storm-ridden boat of our distracted civilization. Otherwise it will head for deep disaster. That is what he said. Then I asked, does that mean that she is to be debarred from claiming equal rights with men? Tagore replied, By no means. All I suggest is that she must not forget that her life has a real mission which is not the duplicate of her partner's. Of course she is there to cooperate with him, to give him her comradeship, often her guidance as well, if need be. But she would do well to remember that cooperation is not on all fours with imitation, and she will cooperate best if she is ready to give the help which she alone can offer. In other words, she must find her proper place in society and not rush out to fill somebody else's. And this she can only achieve by being true to her nature and her swadharma. Then I asked, but why may she not aspire to share man's work in his sphere as well? Tagore answered, because her nature is unsuited for it. She could never be at home in the world of masculine, rough and tumble activities. For he paused for a moment as though in quest of one of those happy similes which never failed him, then said, "For woman's function works passively, subterraneously, like the roots of a tree, while man's fulfillment consists in spreading himself out like the branches through growth, adventure, activity. But in order that this activity may find fruition in lasting contributions to our civilization, his roots must be strongly embedded in firm soil, otherwise his upward growth becomes top-heavy and lopsided. Woman furnishes this stable soil, strong basis, by nursing tenderly the fecund depths of his personality." Then I asked another question. "Excuse me, but is this not simply another way of saying there is a fundamental difference between man and woman?" "Of course," Tagore answered. "Do you think that the eternal play of this universe could have been sustained otherwise? No, it is unthinkable. If woman had been but an exact counterpart of man with exactly the same role to play, life as we know it would have ceased to exist long ago. Fortunately, woman is not man's replica, but his fellow pilgrim in their joint journey through life. And that is why the Mass still continues, the Leela, the play. And that is why he went on to add, woman is so richly endowed by nature with just the qualities which man lacks, like humility, endurance, patience, faithfulness, self-abnegation. These have imparted stability to our masculine world of restless creation. For the feminine character is essentially a storehouse of throbbing life. She is the great incubator of nascent strength, healer of the jaded spirit. Life without her would be one unrelieved round of pointless gaieties, ephemeral excitements, and spasmodic energy dogged by bottomless reaction, not unlike that which follows drug stimulation." Then I asked, "There are some who say, don't they, that woman is incapable of creation on any but the inferior plane, and therefore must always play the second fiddle to man on the higher plateaus of life?" Tagore answered, "I cannot dream of assigning such an undignified role to woman." He said this rather warmly and added, "I appreciate her contribution to life far too highly for that, and I will tell you why. I feel that just as on the physical plane man's germ works in the background while woman carries it within her and nurses it into life, so in the mental plane the inspiration of woman must first implant its seed in man's subconscious in order that his creative impulses may bear fruit. So you see, woman's function in life is not really confined to the physical plane. She is as indispensable to man's mental creation as man is to her physical. It is only because on the mental plane she works unseen behind the screen that we do not visualize her contribution at this stage. But that is only because we are not sufficiently imaginative and discerning." There he ended.